Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Meet Zinnia.
You are being very polite to someone who is attempting to kill us.
Her wife, Saffron.
You know I'm wildly, madly in love with you.
And their best friend, Goldie.
Glad we didn't miss all the fun.
Swords in hand, they defend their city from the worst of humanity.
I am Lord Buxton Blue.
Equity Electric.
Herr Haig. Virgil Walcott. Vicious Swa.
Follow their adventures on the Swashbuckling Ladies Debate Society audio drama podcast. Available now at truestory.fm/swashbuckling.
Hey, movie lovers, I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson. We are the hosts of the Next Reel Film Podcast.
If you're passionate about films like we are, you'll love our show. Each week, we dive deep into a movie, discussing everything from the story and performances to the cinematography and score.
Not to mention budgets and awards. We have covered iconic series like Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather trilogy, examining themes of power, family, and the dark side of the American dream.
We've explored the works of groundbreaking directors like Catherine Bigelow, discussing her mastery of tension.
We've looked at heist films, great car chases, great years in film, couples on the run, and more.
Our discussions go beyond the surface, examining what makes each film tick. We believe that when the movie ends, the conversation begins.
And we'd love for you to join that conversation. Find the Next Reel Film Podcast on your favorite podcast app or at thenextreel.com.
The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins. Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
It is Pete Wright.
On today's episode, we have invited cinematographer and underwater DP Ian Seabrook to talk about Terrence Young's Thunderball, a movie he likes. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
We are thrilled to have you here talking about this. We've talked to a lot of cinematographers, but I don't know if any of them have worked underwater. They certainly haven't told us about it. So we are thrilled to have you on board because it's a whole other world for sure once you step under the water.
Yeah, that's what you end up hiring a specialist for, I suppose, or an aerial cinematographer, same thing. Although some people want to control the entire production, they want to have their input, and it's their prerogative. If they're the main unit cinematographer, they're going to have their hands in everything, and they should because it's their picture. So,
all right. So let's jump back to the beginning of your career and figure out how did you decide I want to be not just working with cameras but underwater? Because it looks like on your IMDb page, it looks like you started specifically kind of just in the camera department, and then eventually you kind of started moving into the underwater projects.
Yeah, I became sort of enamored with water in general when I was a youngster. Like many guests that you've had on this show, everybody's story starts somewhere, but there were National Geographic magazines my parents subscribed to, like a lot of people of that era. Nobody really does that anymore, but so I would always kind of gaze upon the sharks and turtles and marine life and scuba divers, which I didn't, obviously when I was young, I didn't know how to do any of that. And then part of the reason why Thunderball was selected was it's still kind of an influence in my canon, if you will. And that was something that I saw James Bond pictures, saw them when I was, young and impressionable. I may have seen Thunderball around, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 or something like that. When we were we spent a lot of our holidays in the United Kingdom, and they always had that sort of adventure stuff on around that time. So I got interested in stills photography, did the darkroom route, did the film single lens reflex, non-reflex route, and then went to Australia after my mom passed away. And I got certified on the Great Barrier Reef. And
nice. Good place to do it.
Yeah. Well, at the time it was somewhat devoid of marine life. And so you can imagine it was like the 50s and the 60s, or, the Thunderball era was probably the time to go and actually see that, because everybody that I talked to said, "Oh, mate, you should have seen it back in the day." Yeah. And you're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. Right.
So again, I was the only person to rent the dive facility that we were up in the it was up in Cairns or Townsville. So the Gold Coast. The group anyway. I went and was the only person who rented like a plexiglass camera housing with an Instamatic camera that you basically you give them the whole camera and that goes off to the developers and they process the whatever. But I knew enough at that point to select chrome or slide film because I wanted them. I didn't just want them to be prints because the prints obviously sometimes that also depended on where you got them done. If the prints were crummy, but versus the chrome, they couldn't really screw that up. So then that gave you a good indication of what your exposure was, what your composition was, what your focus was. Even though it was an Instamatic camera, it's still the first sort of framing groundwork for that sort of discipline. I still have those photos, by the way. There, and I think I might have taken the first selfie of myself because there's a picture of me holding the camera, or I don't know how I did it because no one else was there with me, but I have like this neon pink wetsuit on, and I was like, wow, there are no documents of me wearing because that was what everybody was wearing in that time frame.
Yeah, right.
So then I got into the, so basically I was in New Zealand and I was, I had dropped out of university and I had taken off, gone traveling after my mom passed away, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I had a keen interest in diving, and it was new and exciting. And I also had the interest in photography, and I just thought I was going to combine those two and be an underwater documentary cinematographer. That was the initial outset. And I remember the moment that I figured that out was on a place called Cape Reinga in the North Island of New Zealand. They also call it 90 Mile Beach because literally it's 90 miles of deserted beach and sort of Planet of the Apes kind of landscape. But anyway, there were no schools. You had to do all this stuff. And now there's a few sort of places that have specified areas of study. I mean, the Society of Camera Operators, which I belong to, they do run courses on how to sort of operate the camera and whatever, but there wasn't any of that at the time. And basically there were so few people doing it. So I did more stills photography underwater courses. That meant, getting on a liveaboard dive boat with an instructor, whether they were good or not. You just had to absorb whatever the information was and then you would extrapolate, you would use what you could and you would discard what you didn't feel was required. So on one particular trip, there was a National Geographic photographer who arguably to me is, one of the greatest underwater photographers, David Dubélé. He's still alive, and I believe he's still shooting. So he was a guest on the boat. He was doing a program for National Public Radio on the life cycle of the kelp on the Channel Islands. So a few dives that I did, I just watched him work. We had an assignment to do. Like, you pay the money for the course. They say, okay, you have to have a fish species, a marine mammal, something, and you've got to shoot it in its environment, and you've got to sort of pretend that you're being hired by a photo editor to go and capture this. So it was actually a pretty good framework for to get discipline on how to shoot this stuff. So, and I was feeling very insecure and inadequate a little bit because I had a Nikonus 5, which is a single lens reflex underwater only camera, and the boat was filled with doctors and lawyers who had. That's what they were. I'm not like finger pointing. That's what they had. All the money. They had the greatest, systems, and they had all the money and a zillion lenses and strobe systems, and I had like nothing. And I had to, I even had to sub-rent like a 20 millimeter lens. So I went then I started shooting, and I didn't think it was very good, and I was completely intimidated by everyone else's equipment. And then just talking to Dubélé, he kind of put me at ease a little bit more. On one particular dive that I was finished, I just started, we were off gassing, and and I hadn't really shot much, or I'd shot 2/3 of the roll, and I thought, none of it's great. And it wasn't about winning anything. It was just like, I just don't think that I thought this was going to be easier, maybe is what I thought. And so I started shooting some stuff while we were off gassing, just sort of not decompressing, but just like doing the safety stuff. And we had to submit photos for this competition. And so David Dubélé was one of the judges. And so I ended up winning third prize.
Okay.
On one of the photos that I thought was, I didn't even want to submit it. And it's a backlit shot of kelp in somewhat shallower water than 80 feet or anything, because we were kind of surfacing. But so I thought, oh, if someone of that caliber thought that photograph was good, then maybe
there's a future.
Maybe it's a good thing that I didn't have so many distractions of all this equipment, because what I ended up seeing was all the equipment was railroading a lot of these amateur photographers. There were so many attachments that there's so much equipment to worry about, and there were so many settings that they had to fiddle with, and a lot of stuff was out of focus, poorly composed, not exposed properly. And I'm not saying that I was better than them, but I managed, because I was utilizing my sort of stills photography background. I took it very seriously. And so I kind of knew where the focus was, and I knew what the exposure would be like. So then when the film was and we had a dark room on the boat. So there's some poor soul who was in the bowels of the ship,
just doing that all day.
He was doing pieces.
Oh, wow.
And like vomiting. He was sort of like, I got one more roll to do, come up all sweaty and pale. But thankfully he was there, because, everyone's film got developed. And then we would study everyone's work. A lot of the people with the bigger systems were quite quiet when their work was up, because I have all this, I have the latest, greatest stuff, but I can't capture what I want to capture. And then Dubélé gave his greatest hits of all the great National Geographic photographs that he has done, and how he got them. So, and the sun was setting, and I just thought there's nowhere in the world that could eclipse this moment for me. And so I just kept sort of doing it. And I knew that I wanted to be a cinematographer. So when I got into the film industry as a clapper loader, I kept doing these trips, and I kept, and I knew that there was basically, one or two pieces of equipment that were used underwater for camera housings, as far as, we were shooting with Airy 3s back then, probably. And so I started to assist on underwater productions, underwater segments of television shows. And then I ended up working with Pete Romano, who runs Hydroflex, who, he worked on The Abyss and a bunch of James Bond films. And he was very patient with a lot of my questions. And again, my attention to detail was no different from any, assistant. You had to, you couldn't, if you were assisting the equipment, be it aerial, underwater, you had to have strong attention to detail, or what's going to happen. Well, the camera housing is going to flood, and that's, $250,000 or $500,000 is going to be destroyed because of your incompetence. So it really fine-tuned your assistant skills, I found. And because it was on film and it was not digital at the time. So when I first started, a lot of it was all film, and I still shot some film. I shot film on M. Night Shyamalan's Old, and I was like, oh, I love this. I still love the whirl of the shutter and the sound of it. Because a lot of these digital cameras can't even, is it rolling? The red button's not on, and you somehow otherwise engaged with what's going on. I've totally seen it where camera operators have had the camera on, and it's not even recording. They've done that was amazing, and the power and emotion that came out of that. You're like, yeah. And the assistant's like, oh, we didn't roll. You're like, what? So,
what does a film camera sound like underwater?
Well, because it's in a aluminum casing, like the 435, which is sort of the last 35 millimeter, last 35 millimeter camera, I think that Aeroflex put out. It's kind of like, you can hear it, but it's sort of like, you still hear it.
Yeah.
And I always had these cameras had alarms on them, recording alarms. So when you would turn it on, it would beep, this obnoxious loud beep. And it was just kind of funny when you're shooting a film on set, not underwater, and they say, okay, that camera, the second camera, take a late roll. Okay, great. Yeah, because we're going to burn through too much film. The first chunk of that is not useful, but then when the actor comes over here, roll. Okay, great. and then be in the middle of this dialogue scene, and all of a sudden, beep, the thing would turn on because they hadn't really either figured a way to turn the signal off.
Yeah.
Back then, we had to either like short circuit it or something. But I think, the Alexa, all the digital cameras have it. That's an audible beep. And every time I have it in the camera housing, I always have it turned up loud so that I can see that the record button's on, but because it's electronics and a computer, you're like, okay,
Just want to make sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Anyway, so I started working on productions as an assistant and, so loading the film, pulling the housing out of the water, opening the housing, changing a lens, changing magazines, changing batteries, knowing all that stuff, not flooding everything, make sure that everything was sealed properly because I'd had all of that stills photography background, loading on boats, in current and waves and saltwater spray coming everywhere. So that training transferred over to the motion picture industry where the equipment is a lot more expensive. And so the attention to detail was, equally important, if not more, really. Because, it's one thing to ruin your own equipment, but it's someone else's equipment that's, it's a lot more expensive. Anyway, and then, as if you stick with something, I suppose, and if you're persistent, I got offered a commercial to shoot underwater. Bud Light commercial was the first thing I shot on film. And then, like many people in the film industry, as far as department heads, the first feature I shot underwater was a horror movie. And it was one of the Hellraiser sequels. I don't remember which one.
Hellseeker.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, right. I'm not sure if it's 5 or 6 or 7 or what it was, but
and it'll lose track of the number system.
They gave up on numbers.
Yeah. We're up to 14 now. Like, I didn't even see 13. No. But I was the A-camera focus puller on that film. They had underwater work, and it was a low-budget film. They didn't have the money to hire an underwater cinematographer, so I put my name forward, and they knew that I was interested, and the director was very supportive. Everybody was very supportive, and I worked very hard. And I was presented on that show with a problem that has come up on many, many shoots, but it was the first time I had to solve the problem, and that was talent in the water, uncomfortable and terrified, and not wanting to perform or participate. And the problem was compounded by the fact that we were shooting in a car. The character is supposed to be trapped in a car that's sinking. And there are a select few actors that I've worked with over the years who are in an overhead environment that's not easy to get out of. They are terrified, but they are able to shut that off, and they are able to act and continue with the scene. So because they're underwater, it doesn't mean you have to act afraid. Well, because most people usually are afraid. Acting,
yeah.
But
right.
I've certainly been in, and there's a few standout thespians that have still been able to get into their character when they're in that environment. Anyway, so I had to solve the problem. I couldn't just say, well, she doesn't want to, participate. We just have to, we'll just have to not shoot that part. We still had to get the day done, and I had to figure out how to do it. So, with that, we took the door of the car off, and I placed the door on with some C-stands to brace it, and I raised everything up so that she was very, very close to the surface. And then I had some kind of an overhead black device, either duvetine or chloroplast or something to mimic the fact that there was a roof on the car. So I basically had to build the car a lot shallower and sort of pull things. Like the door is easy to pull off, but the rest of the stuff, like the steering wheel, the dashboard, none of that was there. So then I had to shoot on a very, very, very tight lens, which I typically don't do underwater. But I had to lose the fact that there was that you wouldn't be able to see. All you would wanted to see was just her face, pounding against the glass, trying to get out of the car. And that's all. They needed that one beat. And so that's kind of how we did it.
And was this in like a pool that you were all shooting in for the body of water?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was already kind of a safer environment rather than a location or anything like that. It's just the nature of an actor being in a situation where they they're having a hard time, basically.
Correct. Yeah. And I've always, like, my principal concern when we're doing any of this work is the safety of the talent in the water. In some cases more so than my own safety. And I'm not reckless in that way. It's just that, basically with this job, I have to, and any underwater cinematographer has to shut your diving skills off to a certain extent, because when you are concentrating on the four corners of the frame, that's all that's really important. And apart from the fact that, yes, you need to monitor your air, you need to monitor current, you need to monitor all the extraneous things that are going to foul you up, water clarity, if the talent is getting away from you because they're not anchored properly. You do have to pay attention to all of this stuff, but it's almost in the back of your head while it is for me, and I'm sure it is for anybody who does this job. But so, the most important thing, I give everything, I give myself to the production. I'm committed to it. I don't, well, that didn't work. I guess, I don't know, I'm stumped. I'm not sure what to do now. I mean, of course, you're going to be presented with things where perhaps you haven't come up against this before, or it's challenging you. But the challenging part should push you, I feel, into a problem-solving mode, or, perhaps you learn something, or,
I want to just make sure that we chat a little bit about Last Breath, which is this new movie that you just worked on that is coming out. The trailer is just a terrifying sort of situation about an underwater team of deep sea divers who are dealing with a surface storm that kind of throws the equipment. I mean, it's kind of very similar, like, to The Abyss. Totally different story, obviously. I'm pretty sure this one's not going to end up with aliens in it. But, like, something on top throws the ship askew, and it messes up it pulls the equipment, and one of the divers is left behind, and now they have to go and figure out how they can save him. Simu Liu looks like he's going to be having a lot of time in the wetsuit down there. So, I mean, just as far as, like, what you learned on something like your Hellraiser experience to working on Last Breath.
Well, a large portion of the script was underwater, which is, I could say that it's not unusual, but it can be at times a bit rare. Usually the underwater sequences maybe they can be a page, they can be spread out over several different scenes, if you're lucky. And with Last Breath, of course, there was a lot more work involved. The project itself was challenging for every single department, and there was not enough time and there was not enough money, which is, again, another constraint. So did that constraint help everyone not work better, but just did it push people? And I think it did. It pushed, and sometimes when you're pushed and your back is against the wall and you have to solve a problem, you need to find a solution for this picture. You're not just a participant; you are leading the light brigade. So basically, on that picture, that was we had a lot larger underwater unit than is sort of typical on just doing a sequence. But there was still the same. We had a lot more safety divers, is really because we had to manage the umbilicals at the divers. They're all doing surface bungee diving, and so all the equipment was real. None of it was fake movie stuff. And that runs parallel to what happened in The Abyss as well. They were using real surface supply equipment, commercial diving equipment. And we did use this on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny again, that was an overhead environment as well. So you have to have people they have to know that that's going to be their environment, and they have to be comfortable in that environment.
You've used the term overhead environment several times. I just want to make sure for people who don't know the terminology, what are you describing when you say that?
It's a structure that's overhead. I just said it again. It's a structure you enter, be it a car or a vessel. If it's a lot of times, there's a ship that's sunken and the divers are going to penetrate the wreck and go in and look around. That's an overhead environment because you can't just swim up to get out. And sometimes if you fall in the water and you have a mask on, you can see the bubbles. And if it's pitch black, but you can't see the bubbles usually always rise. They don't submerge. So that usually tells you what direction is up or where the bubbles are going. So
okay.
when you're in an overhead environment, it's not as easy to escape from. And then I don't really mean escape in a perilous way, because we would not put the talent in danger in that regard. But with this film and some of the sequences in this film, they do take place in a subsea structure that is an overhead environment, where the lead actor, Finn Cole, who was on surface supply and was wearing a helmet to feed him air, he was sort of not tangled, but his character kind of gets like he has to maneuver himself out of pipes and a lot of framework and equipment that these subsea underwater workstations that are real in the oil and gas industry. So he had to be able to manipulate himself out of that, and so then as he's kind of moving himself out of that environment, you need a tender who's going to be pulling his umbilical so that it doesn't get snagged on anything. And we had safety protocols, we had professional dive coordinators, we had all this, like it wasn't just sort of made up. But, again, as you're shooting and filming this, you're acutely aware of monitoring the actor. I'm the person who's closest to the talent. And if they're in a vehicle or if they're just swimming or whatever, I'm the first person. And sometimes that, the directors, Ridley Scott, for example, or even Luc Besson in the Big Blue, they operate the camera. The director operates the camera, and these two examples. And they're the closest to the performer. I mean, the old sort of Hollywood way was that the director would sit on an apple box or be right by the camera, so that the actor is right there and there's that sense of trust. And so what I'm getting at is that because you're the first line of trust. So, and oftentimes if it's a sequence, I'm not on the entire production. I'm in for maybe a week or a couple of days or whatever it is. So when you're just meeting this person for the first time, this actor doing the underwater sequence there, and you can figure out pretty quickly if they're interested in this at all or they're not. Right.
Yeah. Or if you're going to have another Hellraiser experience.
When I met Bruce Willis, he was absolutely not interested. Ian, did you meet Bruce? And he just sort of gave me this. And, he was great, but he had no interest in doing that at all. And I could see that with each take, you'd come up and you'd say, how was that? And I'd say, that was fantastic, without blowing their ego out of proportion, but you need to encourage them. It's like, that was great, because you're in the sequence, you're in, again, not using too many words, but in the sequence, he's holding his breath. And so then he's got the veins popping in his neck. And I just said, yeah, there's some really great veins popping in the neck. And it really sells to the audience that you're in peril. And they'll either go, oh, okay, cool. Or they'll go, okay, that's enough, I'm done.
Yeah.
So use that as motivation for them to want to do more. And he really wanted to do more when he got some feedback. But because it's not, the communication is different, there's a foreign environment, sometimes the willingness to participate, I just don't want to do this, or I'm done after one, or I can't clear my ears. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong, that don't go wrong when you're shooting on a film set, on a normal film set.
Right.
Well, I'm assuming a film like Last Breath, I mean, because of the context of the story, like they're casting people who already have said, I know what the story is. I'm expecting this, and I'm willing to kind of go through the motions of learning how to actually do this the right way.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that in the beginning, the role was recast because of that exact reason. They cast someone who signed on, knew about the diving, and then learned how to dive, and then said, I can't do this. And the director, Alex, called me in a bit of a panic, like, what do we do? And I just said, this is really good that we've discovered this, because we
figure it out now. Yeah.
You don't have to now reshoot everything. Because basically, how do you tell who the actors are if they have dive helmets on? Well, what do they do in the abyss? Well, they had custom made helmets so that you could see Ed Harris, Michael Biehn, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, And so on this production, most commercial dive helmets have a mouthpiece. All you're going to see is eyes and maybe a forehead. That's it. That can lead to confusion sometimes. Well, who is that? And so it's like, well, okay, so that guy has a red suit and that guy has a blue suit, and you can't see their face, but you can see their eyes. So that's how you figure it out. But then, it for the audience, it needs to be easier to register than that. So then there was a plan to make custom-made helmets, the same thing that happened on the Abyss, and of course that's cost related, and then there's a testing phase. Can they wear this equipment comfortably? And by the way, it's life support. It's keeping you alive. It's not like the actors on Alien, like Tom Skerritt and Cartwright and John Hurt. They all complained that the outfits they were wearing were a big pain in the ass. The thing fogged up. They couldn't see, and they probably couldn't wait to get out of it.
Yeah, right.
We got that sequence over with, but. So again, and we had a microphone system in there so they could hear the director on the surface. I couldn't hear. I still have this sort of old school working method whereby, for communication, there's a speaker in the water. It's a loudspeaker, and there's like a CB radio style control that it's connected to on the surface, usually positioned by a monitor, so that as the director or the first AD is watching what's happening, they can say, okay, are you ready? Or they can say, okay, action and cut, or 3, 2, 1, go, or any of these instructions. And I usually always ask that they speak slowly and they repeat themselves twice. There's no précis or soliloquies about, and believe me, everybody does it. They're like, okay, so on the next one, maybe you can, you're angry. Nobody can hear any of that.
Yeah, right.
Everybody, the actors are either blah, 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 blah,
yeah.
Everybody else in the water is doing it, so it's loud, which is why marine life's like, I'm out of here. When you're shooting in the open ocean, they're just like they're devoid because they can't stand all the noise.
Well, that actually brings up a question that I have for you about because looking at what you have upcoming, you've got Last Breath, which Andy leaned on. I see Nobody too, and I'm very excited because Nobody was a fantastic movie. Who knows what you're putting Odenkirk up to? But Moana, the live action Moana for 2026, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a very different aesthetic. And I can only imagine what you're doing when you have actors that I assume you're putting underwater with no equipment in some complicated sort of circumstances. And I know we're way out of field from Thunderball, but can you talk a little bit about your approach to giving the Rock a giant hook and sending him into the ocean?
Well, I can't talk a ton about that just because of the NDA that everybody signed. But
yeah,
it's essentially you're correct. No one's wearing any scuba equipment or surface supply equipment, so it's all done on breath hold. And so then there's usually an apnea trainer, a trainer who will work with the talent so that they can hold their breath. And again, when the camera rolls, the pressure's on, so the heartbeat goes up. And what you were able to accomplish in a pool on a Sunday morning with 3 or 4 people around, now that you've got an army of people all looking at the monitor and you've got your wardrobe on, and okay, you're ready and you're hanging on to a piece of the ship or the pontoon or whatever you're supposed to be doing, and then suddenly something changes, or there's a current that's added, or they use a dump tank and you've never experienced what that's like to be tumbled in a underwater, rinse and dry machine. So we did a lot of rehearsals. And again, I'm trying to sort of steer. I'm not revealing anything.
Dance around,
of course.
right,
Dance as much as you want. I just, it's the practical part of like putting your stamp on a property that is beloved in this other format, right? And I think that is a curious responsibility for you.
Yeah. I enjoyed the film, the animated picture. I was very honored to participate with Moana. So hopefully that turns out great.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back in time and start talking about Thunderball.
James Bond is in operation. And what an operator he is in Ian Fleming's
Thunderball. Have you seen everything you came to see? Now go back to your friends and report. Tell them the little fish I throw back into the sea.
I've had this obsession with underwater since a very young age, and Thunderball is part of that. When I kind of went into some of the other films that you gentlemen have had on this podcast, I thought, everybody wants to talk about Apocalypse Now or a Terrence Malick film or 2001: Space Odyssey, but then you pick Thunderball. The reason I picked it was it was a very early influence, and I still feel that it is an influence. I feel that it's relevant in that the current sort of this is a series of productions that has gone on for quite a long time, and there's different actors that have portrayed the lead character, but it's the films have drawn enthusiasts from all over the world, and it's attracted thespians like Judi Dench and Ralph Fiennes to want to participate in it. It's not like some stupid comic book thing that kids like, because I get that was more, some of them haven't aged well, and obviously there's parts of Thunderball that are, it's even some of the diving and some of the shooting sharks with squirt guns. You're sort of like, oh, that's real. Like that's not
there
right. That's a real
questionable moments there. Yeah,
exactly. So, but it's all part of everyone has something that they were attracted to.
This is a great example of Hollywood or filmmakers taking what is out there as far as the underwater technology and saying, what can we do? Because this is pretty early on. Like this is still like, Jacques Cousteau days, right? We're kind of like just still figuring out how to actually do all of this. And, we've talked about an earlier film than this on our other podcast, The Next Reel, The Frogmen from 1951, which is an interesting one because it's working with the military and how they actually would have these frogmen teams and what they would do underwater. But so it's interesting to kind of see the evolution. And now we get to this where, we're having full on action sequences and not just like one sequence, but there's a lot of underwater photography. I think I saw somewhere like a quarter of the film or something is underwater, which is pretty spectacular.
I did not remember that there is a legitimate shootout in this movie underwater. That was gone from my memory.
Yeah, it's in the second cell of that poster that you've got up there. That's not really inaccurate, apart from the fact that he doesn't really do that fighting with that thing on. But anyway, I timed it. It's 10 minutes.
Yeah, whole fight.
10 minutes of screen time.
So what is that? What do you reckon that equates to in time underwater for that sequence?
Though I think they shot it in about 2 to 3 weeks. It wasn't done over several months. I was kind of surprised I think they shot it mostly with 2 cameras. Again, what's interesting is it's what's going on in background, because it's one thing to stage a fight between 20 to 40 people in the water. That's a nightmare to me, because in order to have control over what's in the frame, and I don't mean control by being, maniacal or anything, but just whatever's in the frame is the most important thing. There's constantly sort of saying, okay, so to the other people that are in the water, the divers, the safety divers, the extraneous people, if you see the lens aiming at you, unless you're an actor, you're in the wrong spot. So you can always pay attention to where, this is one thing I said on Last Breath, we had tons of safety divers in the water.
Yeah.
To manage the umbilicals, to manage the safety of the talent. They have a very, very important role. And I did outline that before we go down, and we had all their Mel Gibson Braveheart speeches before we went down and started shooting all this safety announcements and stuff like that. But I just made sure that they were aware that they were doing a very important job to not diminish their involvement, which is, I'll get these people out of the way. They're in the way, get them out of the way. No. They're very important. And so in Thunderball, you've got 4 layers of fighting going on in the background. So structuring that, I know that it made just look like they just turned everybody to start fighting and they turned the camera on and just got what they got. I think there may have been a little bit of that, but it was very structured what they were doing.
Yeah, I would think so because because you also have to build in, we're going to have all of this fighting going on, but then we're going to cut and we're going to cut into that particular fight that was back there, so we can get some close-ups of the one guy picking the spear gun up so he could go after the other guy. Like they have to be planning about all these different elements so that they can get the close-ups and the medium shots and everything and be able to actually cut it together. I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of work that they put together. And this was a period when, again, we're filming in the 60s and the regulations as far as how they were filming, like from what I was reading, they didn't have any form of communication underwater other than hand signals at the time.
Correct.
So it's like a much more difficult way to go about doing it than like what you have today. And it's amazing that they were able to put that together.
I agree. And Ricou Browning, who was the underwater unit director who played the creature and the creature from the Black Lagoon, he was underwater. He was watching what was going on. There's no video playback. There's no okay, so when Connery comes in with the jetpack and the orange stuff, green stuff coming out of it, he whizzes through and he rips a couple of the specter masks off. And so then they punch in to show the result of what, the black clad specter agent is close up on him.
Yeah.
But you're watching projected dailies, you're watching film dailies, so it's not immediate. You don't go, okay, back that up. And it's so much quicker now. Back that up. Okay, that guy there, let's do a punch on him. On who makes that decision? So they basically, Terrence Young let him run full free. You just shoot what you can, and the fact that all of that is in the water. A lot of people complain this film is kind of one of the worst James Bond movies because it's really boring because of all the underwater work. And I think it depends on your perspective. If you want to watch just Sean Connery or the ladies, maybe there's other pictures that are better suited for that. But let's not forget that this picture was the first of the series to shoot anamorphic widescreen. Goldfinger was 185, I believe, and From Russia with Love, I think, was 166. So basically, and there's all the politics surrounding the script and the lawsuit.
Oh yeah,
that
controversial.
Yeah, that plays into it, because if the film had been released when they wanted to release the film, it would have been the very first James Bond film, and they wouldn't have had the budget that they did for this, nor would it have been widescreen. And the widescreen does help with that underwater battle, whether or not you keep it in the film or not. For sure, it gave the picture scope and color, and they were also shooting with 50 ASA film stock. So if you look at the underwater sequence on this picture, Connery has an orange wetsuit top on, and all the villains are all, and the U.S. Coast Guard guys are all orange and blue, and then the Spectre guys are all black. So the blue and the red is the first color to be absorbed in the light spectrum when you submerge. Usually, it's in the first 15 feet thereabouts. If you look at the theory behind color, the color spectrum, and what happens when it gets absorbed underwater, and I have a lot of these books because it's what you learn when you first start doing photography. And it says, okay, well, if you're shooting color film, these colors are going to not be present. So you need to add artificial light in order to get color, to return the color. So you see a lot of the close-ups of Connery. It's almost like he's got like a 1K, or he's got a big spotlight in his face, because they have to know that it's him. And if he didn't have a spotlight, you probably could still see that it was him, even though he has a thing over his nose.
I was going to say, yeah, to your point, these aren't the masks where they've got the full face. These are, we're just knowing that it's Connery or Largo or whoever just from their eyes.
Correct. Right.
But there's a whole sequence of this movie where he does go undercover by just wearing the mask and thing and swim along with everybody, and nobody notices until very late. So,
yeah,
he pulls it off.
He dresses as one of the Spectre people.
Yes.
And again, that was when they were loading the bombs onto the sleds, which did actually function. All that equipment all functioned, and brilliantly put together by Jordan Klein. And so whereas you would maybe have Largo with a hood on, like they all had a similar uniform, all the specter people hood. Well, that last bit, he doesn't have a hood on because how are you going to tell who anybody is? It's back to my point again. That guy's got a red outfit, and he's got a blue outfit, and they both have helmets on. Well, you can only see their eyes, but okay, now you see that it's Largo because he's got the silver hair.
The wavy hair, right? Yeah.
Right.
But he also has an eye patch on under his mask.
Right, exactly, So, but so Thunderball, I think the film that followed this picture, which was You Only Live Twice, it was photographed by Freddie Young, who won an Oscar for Lawrence of Arabia and Brian's Daughter and Dr. Zhivago. So as the pictures started to expand, they started to attract other people who were outside of that sort of spy genre. And I think that's very important. If you watch Thunderball, which was lit by Ted Moore, and then you look at You Only Live Twice, the shaping of the light is completely different. I do find that you say, well, okay, what is it about this? I mean, as a young kid, and you don't know anything about cinematography or directing or anything, you're like, well, why does that film look different from that film? Why does the film later look different? Is it because it takes place in Japan? Is it the light in the sky? Then as you get older and become interested or obsessed or whatever, you start to notice these small sort of subtle differences. And like to my point is, you look at something like Skyfall, which is arguably the best looking Bond film ever. People said the same thing at around the same time frame as You Only Live Twice. It's the best looking Bond picture because of the cameraman who shot it. And he took a different approach to just like making them all look the same. Now, there are quite a lot of these films which I ignored. I had never seen Octopussy, and everybody has their favorite actor that portrayed. But I guess because not dissimilar when you get into music, and you say, well, what's your favorite album that band put out? Sometimes, not all the time, but it could be the first time you heard them. So
yeah, right, true.
Like Led Zeppelin 3 or whatever. So for me, Connery is quintessential Bond just because of the time frame. It's like a time capsule of the 1960s. And whether the films hold any water anymore, like, oh, that's ridiculous, or he's such a misogynistic pig in most of these films. So if that is bothering you, and it's just the time, it's an illustration of the times. And they even bring that up in, I think it must have been Goldeneye when Judi Dench calls him a misogynistic dinosaur.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they've found ways to bring it in, and over the course of, this franchise has been around long enough where, even by the time we get to Daniel Craig's run, I feel like they're just knowingly kind of shifting all of that in ways where it's they're playing into those elements to kind of flip it on its head.
Yeah.
But what's the interesting opportunity that we have with this movie that is unlike any other movie in the franchise is that they got a do-over, right? With Sean Connery in Never Say Never Again. And that has always broken my brain a little bit. Not just how it came about, but the fact that I think, I went through scrubbing Never Say Never, getting ready for this conversation, and it really holds up for me. I like it. Klaus Maria Brandauer is fantastic. The Spectre treatment is better. But again, that was when I was really, really into Bond, right? I didn't see Thunderball when it first came out. So, yeah, I was thinking I wasn't around. Yeah. But the Never Say Never connection is palpable for me. And I'm curious your take on that, because in watching the underwater stuff in Never Say Never, to my eye, in whenever it was 1991 or something, it does not hold up to Thunderball. They go crazy in Thunderball. And I think, okay, in Never Say Never, Bond drops a ship mast on a shark.
Yeah. There have been underwater sequences peppered throughout the series. There's a little bit of underwater in You Only Live Twice.
Spy Who Loved Me.
But For Your Eyes Only had the best post-Connery work. Now, Never Say Never, of course, was Kevin McClory. And again, he was responsible for what Thunderball is. I mean, many people were responsible for what Thunderball is, but if that lawsuit had not happened, then you wouldn't have the picture that you have, today. And of course, there wouldn't be any Never Say Never either. I didn't do that homework like you did. I did. I own Thunderball, and I own most of the Connery pictures. And I actually wanted to see what the difference was in the structure of the picture. So, Goldfinger got bigger than From Russia with Love, and then this one was even more large. And then from then on, and most of the pictures, apart from The Spy Who Loved Me and The Man with the Golden Gun, were shot with anamorphic lenses. And I actually worked with the camera house that they used on Never Say Never Again. It was built by Jordan Klein, and I believe he did the underwater work on it. I think he ended up selling it to some guy that I ended up working with years later. But so yeah, I think I did go see the picture because Sean Connery fans, great, and everybody keeps referring to it as a remake of Thunderball. Whether or not it actually, if the plot point, I mean, I'm kind of not speaking in turn here because I didn't really go and re-examine it, but yeah, I remember kind of feeling, well, it's not an official James Bond, so maybe
it's not canon. It's not canon.
Yeah.
Well, it's totally fair. It is a very different film, as different as you can imagine from, the novelization. This is one of the interesting ones in Ian Fleming's work, is that it was conceived as a film before it was novelized, and that is that makes it an interesting thing because he essentially got a do-over from the original script and created a Bond in the book that is very different from the Bond we get in Thunderball. And then they get another do-over. McClory gets a do-over to make his version of Bond, which is, again, kind of a twist on James Bond that we knew from the 60s. So
it's interesting during that lawsuit when the prizes were awarded to McClory, his initial plan was to make his own James Bond picture, make his own version of Thunderball.
Yeah.
And I remember sort of Broccoli sort of saying, we don't want a rival film out there. And even though your first film really was not great, we don't need the confusion. But apparently they were looking at Richard Burton.
Wow.
I thought, it would have been such a good James Bond.
Wow.
Because I remember seeing that film Where Eagles Dare with Clint Eastwood. That was part of the sort of the films that I started sort of seeing, when my dad was sort of like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape and Lawrence of Arabia, although to watch it on television is like blasphemy, really. Sort of event cinema in that regard. And so then I kind of started branching off on my own, and Where Eagles Dare was kind of one of those pictures. It was like adventure, spy stuff. And then from there, that probably blossomed off. Like, it's interesting. Like, my film taste is mostly like Paris, Texas, and Leviathan, the Russian picture that came out, and Dead Man, Jim Jarmusch's picture.
Interesting.
None of these pictures have any underwater in them, really. And my favorite shot in Jaws, I have two favorite shots in Jaws, and neither of them are underwater shots. They are the reflection of the shark that goes through the window of the orca, where you see the camera is on Roy Scheider looking at how big the shark is. And then also when he's looking at the book of sharks and the art and the accidents and what can happen with white sharks and stuff. As he's looking at this, then they do this big close-up on him with his glasses, and it's the reflection of, as he's flipping through the pages, you see the reflection in his glasses. Also, after the attack in the estuary, he looks out, and the camera does this zoom.
Yeah, just pushing into the water.
Yeah. That just conveys, he's like, it's out there, and I need to go and get it, or I can't. It's unattainable because I can't. So Jaws is a very obvious film for me to want to talk about. It scared the living bejesus out of me when I saw it. I saw it in the theater for the first time, but I saw it on its, I don't know how many re-released version it had been.
Sure, yeah.
But I remember I had to go to the washroom and splash cold water on my face I was just absolutely, I didn't even want to go back, but I could hear it. It was loud. And I was like, oh, I should go back and find out what happens. But I was absolutely terrified. And so I think, and the film obviously still holds up. I think it really illustrates how great a filmmaker Spielberg can be. I think, everybody has their favorites as far as underwater movies or underwater, because there's not that many of them. Of course, there's the one that you mentioned, The Frogman. And it's interesting. Patrick Loungeway, who was the underwater unit director on Indiana Jones, he was like, we should get together and we should watch or he kept referencing The Frogman, and I was like, oh yeah, he's like, okay, Sea Hunt and The Frogman and Creature from the Black Lagoon, like it's all that.
Yeah,
love that era of filmmaking because it was all new and it had not been done before, and it was like an exploration of the unknown. And I know that just about everything's been done now, and there's, I just loved that era of. It's just exciting to watch that. So you can even watch it and it looks like it's somewhat amateurish, but you're like, yeah,
right.
They were only using one lens and, they weren't using anyway.
Well, and it's interesting to see, like, in a film like Thunderball, you just get a sense of how the policies of how we interact with these other environments has changed from then to now, right? Like, I mean, early on, we as I think he first goes down underwater to meet Domino scuba diving or snorkeling, she's just picking up starfish and stuff like that. And I'm just like, yeah, you really don't do that anymore. Like, and that's just the beginning. And then they're shooting sharks, but it's just like it's just like the treatment of all of this underwater was just so different at the time, and now it's just like, I don't think you necessarily would be putting your actors into a situation where they're swimming with live sharks. It's just interesting to see how at the time it's just like, it's new and we're going to figure it all out and hop in the swimming pool with these sharks, Sean.
Yeah, that's a legendary story.
Yeah.
But again, I think it just had a lot to do with sort of the frontier age of diving. That film attracted a lot of people to the sport, and because it was in the Bahamas and the water was clear, and no one's talking about diving in Michigan. If Thunderball had been shot in Michigan, I don't think there'd be as much enthusiasm.
A little bit less sexy, yeah.
Yeah, we got to get everybody to Nassau. What goes through your head when you watch a modern like adventure or horror movie that's shot underwater that you didn't make? Like I think about movies like Underwater with Kristen Stewart. This is William Eubanks' film, which I thought was terrific and threatening, and the water was an agent of chaos and evil. It was terrifying. Is it just like, are you insufferable when you watch movies underwater like that? Are you just constantly picking it apart, or do you find yourself getting into it?
No, I think if it's well made, I follow what the filmmaker intended. It depends on so Underwater, of course, you knew the whole thing was, most of it is digital, right?
Yeah.
And the Meg and all that stuff, right? So, and the Meg is, a good example of, or Deep Blue Sea or something like that. They've got these sort of cult followings because they're pretty cheesy and they're comical, and they're not going to redo Jaws. You can't redo that picture. And my son was like, "Oh, Jaws isn't even scary," and you're sort of, how can you say that?
Yeah.
Well, the shark looks so fake. It's like, yeah, I know. Jaws itself stands on its own. Try to watch the sequels. There's some of them are unwatchable, right? So the current crop of underwater films that what is it? Under Paris.
That's a good so much CG.
I laughed out loud, especially during the triathlon swimming when they're in the background. You just got all these swimmers getting popped off, and I just thought that was really clever the way they did that. So, and I know that most of it is going to be computer generated. They will have somebody. The last thing I just did, they had underwater drones with dorsal fins on them, so that gave the illusion of the fins going around somebody in the water. And I thought that was clever. I mean, they needed to work on the accuracy of the dorsal fins because they did look like cardboard. But again, if you suspend your disbelief and you're all in, and again, it just depends on if a film like Underwater, if they create that environment and you believe the acting and you kind of go with the story, then none of the other stuff should matter. There was that picture Spear, there was Dustin Hoffman and
The
Sharon
Michael Crichton
Stone.
one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's an element there where I think Queen Latifah gets attacked by all the jellyfish. And I know it's very obvious that they're shooting it in a tank that's like 8 foot deep or something like that. But again, it's how it's constructed, whether the sequence is, good or believable or authentic. Would you be in of course there's Jellyfish Lake, but will they attack you like that? Well, probably not. So because it's in the confines of a horror film, sometimes obviously Spielberg was the one who, because of the problems with the shark, he kind of gave the audience the sense of not seeing what was below. They set that create its own sense of tension. And that's why
right.
that particular film, everybody just copies that. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to recreate the Chrissy shot where the shark kind of thins on her. No, we can't do that. We don't have a wide enough lens and we don't have enough water. That's sometimes been the answer, in a more polite way. But I do think that they'll never do another picture like The Abyss.
Yeah, right.
So when we did Last Breath, it was, I suppose, the closest approximation to that, because we did have an underwater subsea station that they were working off of. It was only 2 cast members, but it was real live equipment that we were utilizing, and we had to figure out some technology not dissimilar. The Abyss had an astronomical amount of technology to figure out, and I still think it is a brilliant film, and I don't really use that. I think that James Cameron's very capable of telling story. I mean, you can look at Aliens or any of his pictures. I think he's a very good story writer, and I think that he's a very capable director. Whether or not I liked all of his films, it's like, well, whether or not I like Coca-Cola, it's like everybody has an opinion about that. But I mean, for sure, The Abyss has been, when I saw it, and I've seen it numerous times, and I own several versions of it. And I've known people who worked on it, and none of them, they're like, "Oh, what was it like?" And they're like, "It was 9 months of hell," and they won't talk about it, right? So, and it became sort of the beacon to like, okay, so every picture that I've liked, and if it's Alien or Blade Runner or The Abyss or what have you, they were torturous productions to work on. So does the tension and the aggression with which these productions were filmed, does that transpose onto the finished product? Does that make the film, does all of that went into the production of the film, does that transmit when you're watching it? Why are you attracted to, I don't know what your favorite films are, but why is anybody attracted to Blade Runner? Why is anyone attracted to Alien? Because I think at the time when it came out, nobody had seen anything like it.
Yes.
And so are people trying to find that Blade Runner or Alien where it's unknown and no one, there's been plenty of underwater movies. Beneath the Surface, there's a Swedish, I think it's Swedish picture that these 2 sisters go diving and there's an accident or like a earthquake, underwater tsunami, and then one of them gets trapped, and they made an American remake of it. I can't remember what they called it, but the Swedish version I thought was, and so you've got 2 characters, and then one of them's underwater quite a bit, and the other one's trying to rescue her or whatever. But I still think that it was, if you go with the characters and if the filmmakers pull you in and you care about the characters, and the story may be wafer thin, but if you care about the characters, that to me is the biggest challenge. And if that's
what it's all about, yeah.
Then you can go and say, "Oh, Underwater was great," or Sharknado was great because I really believed that people. They were sucked into the vortex of whatever it is, whatever analogy you want to have. But
the Paris-based sewer underwater baby shark cyclone, like that was.
Yeah,
I was there for.
If you can believe it,
if you went with, we got it. Now we have to detonate all these sharks. You're like, yeah, oh my god, there's a giant labyrinth of them all, and I just thought it's ridiculous. But it's also, if you go with it, then you go,
what it's about.
It's fun, as opposed to such a POS. I turned it off immediately.
It's kind of the reason I bring up Underwater, because the idea of you as an underwater filmmaker watching a movie that is so full of CG water, right, and environments, is that anathema to you? Are you a purist in that regard? And it sounds like kind of yes, kind of no.
Yeah, it depends on the project. If you know that it's that most of it's going to be computer generated, it just, I guess you have to either suspend your disbelief, or I can't really, I mean, I saw the mag, I didn't see it in the theater. My son was raving about it, and I knew that it was going to be ridiculous.
It was
You're right
ridiculous.
there.
That's confirmed.
Yeah. So again, you're not going to say it's one of the best films you've ever seen or anything, but I just think it depends. I think it depends on what the film is. Like Under Paris, we'll just use as an example. Ridiculous concept, but it was well made for what they were trying to convey, right? So, and what do people want to see in those films? Well, it's a shark movie. They want to see body parts everywhere. Or they want to feel like they're going to get scared or whatever. Underwater with Kristen Stewart. So, what do they want to see? They want to see some environment that's frightening, or they want to see her escape, or how are they going to escape, or any of these. If it's well made, I can get through that. But yeah, I would say that if there has to be, I think they should make an effort to do some of it practical, right? And because otherwise, if I just say, we'll just do it all digital. And the original plan in Last Breath was that they wanted to have digital particulate for the water, and I'm against that. And I've worked on productions where my work has been digitally augmented, and I think it makes it look like a cartoon sometimes if it's done incorrect. So I fight against that, and I try to find a way to do it practically, because I think when you're pushed to solve problems. Any of the people that you've had on this podcast, we've all been pushed to try to solve problems. And I think that's when it can push a project beyond what people thought it could be, or that the people could be capable of. And I think that that's important. That way you don't get apathetic about your job, or I love what I do. And when I'm on a picture, they own me. I'm when you're on Last Breath, I'm going diving on the weekend, or I'm going to go snorkeling and so, I'm going to go to a yoga retreat. It's like, well, I'm watching dailies, and I'm having 4 or 5 other meetings, and then maybe there's time for dinner, and then I have a laundry day on Sunday, and then back to work again. So I'm not saying that break out the violins, but I mean, any department head on a picture is going to not have, you're just on the picture, you're committed,
you're living it, yeah.
And I think it's all for the betterment of the film. Everything that you can do just to make it a good film, and hopefully that comes through. I really do honestly hope that people do like Last Breath. I know it is based on a true story. It's based on the documentary that you can watch on Netflix, and for sure there's going to be comments. It's totally inaccurate. The helmets look ridiculous, and the diving bell's got too much room in it, and you'd never do that. Like, these are the guys who work in that industry. Totally, they're going to say that, but it's not. It's not a documentary. It's a narrative version of the documentary, and it's based on a real story. So of course, there's going to be artistic license here and there, but I really do hope that that the film does well, that it's successful, because the people who were involved with it were wonderful people, and we all worked hard, and we were all pushed against the wall. And wasn't just something. Moana was a completely different experience. Look at the budget on that picture, and then look at the budget on Last Breath. They're completely different. So, you do have to fight for your art, or whatever the analogy is. I just think that, otherwise, if you don't like it, or you get discouraged, then that's when apathy checks in, and then it's like, this is just another one of these movies. Right. And so we'll just do it like this, the way that it's always been done. I never had that attitude, so.
That's good. Well, I mean, this seems like a great place to wrap up the conversation. I mean, what an amazing amount of just storytelling and interesting perspectives from all the work you do. Thank you so much for being here to talk with us about your career and everything that you're working on, plus all the great stuff in Thunderball. Ian, thank you so much.
Sure, appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's really a great podcast you guys have.
Do you have any places online that people can learn more about what you're up to? Website, or are you on the socials at all?
I'm only on Instagram, and I think it's Ian Seabrook, all one word _, because Ian Seabrook every other version of it was taken by somebody else. So you're like, I'm the only. No.
Right.
These two little guys. One's a realtor, one's a car nut or whatever. Anyway, and then I have my company's dorsal fin production. So I have a website. My demo reels on there. And just some other information. I also shoot on the surface. I shoot second unit work on the surface, not just strictly underwater. But I know that once you get, not dissimilar from what one of your other guests, Deborah Scott, was saying, you can get pigeonholed if they know that you do either, she only does science fiction movies or he only does underwater. So I mean, that's mostly known for, but I actually do shoot other stuff as well. But anyway,
it's always good to know.
Well, your catalog of contributions to the industry and to some of, frankly, my favorite films is Legion. So seriously, thank you so much for being here. We just are huge fans, and thanks for doing the work.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. Thanks a lot.
Well, we'll have the links for all of your all places to find you in the show notes. Again, we certainly appreciate you joining us here today. For everyone else out there, we hope you like the show, and we certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of film podcasts. The music is Chomp Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time. Hey, Pete, have you ever been fascinated by the allure of secret societies throughout history?
Are you kidding me right now, Andy? I live for this stuff. From the Freemasons to the Illuminati, I am obsessed with these clandestine groups. The Rosicrucians and their ancient wisdom, the Skull and Bones Society at Yale with its powerful alumni network. I'm drawn to them. There's something about how they offer this exclusive access to hidden knowledge. They totally capture my imagination. It's like they give this sense of belonging to something greater than oneself.
Wow, sounds like you're looking for one yourself.
Do you even need to ask? Where do I sign? How much blood do I have to give? Are there any required tattoos or brands involved? Is it my first or second born that they need?
Well, what if I told you that there's a secret society for film lovers right here at the Next Reel family of film podcasts, all proud members of the True Story FM network, and you don't have to give any blood or either of your kids?
You've got my attention, Andy. What can you tell me about this cinematic brotherhood?
When you become a member of the Next Reel family, you gain access to a treasure trove of exclusive content, early episode releases, and a community of passionate film enthusiasts who share your love for movies. It's like being initiated into a secret order where you're privy to the inner workings of our shows, including the Next Reel, the Film Board, Movies We Like, Sitting in the Dark, and CinemaScope.
But Andy, as a member, will I unlock a world of bonus content from extended conversations and behind-the-scenes insights to exclusive pre-show and post-show discussions that expand the conversations about the films we love?
Why, yes, the true power of this secret society lies in its community. As a member, you'll join an exclusive group within our Discord community where you can engage in clandestine conversations with other passionate film fans in our members-only channels.
But what about live recordings, Andy? The sacred rituals of any good cinematic order. Will these episodes be scheduled in advance so that members like me will know when to gather around the virtual pyre in real time via YouTube?
Ah, yes. Perhaps the greatest secret of all is that by becoming a member, you're not just investing in your own entertainment, you're also supporting the tireless work of our independent creators and helping to keep the magic of cinema alive and well. So if you're ready to join this elite group of film lovers and unlock the secrets of cinema, head over to truestory.fm/join. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you will gain access to a world of exclusive content, engaging discussions, and a community that shares your passion for movies. Head to truestory.fm/join to sign up.
Andy, I can't wait for you to welcome me into the inner circle of the Next Reel family of film podcasts. I'll see you in the secret chambers. Now, when do I get my ring?
Well, we don't actually offer rings with your membership.
Tattoos or brands? When can I do that?
No tattoos.
Secret handshakes?
Tell you what, you and I can come up with our own secret handshake, okay?
No, I mean, at the very least.
I love having these wonderful chats on movies we like with all these industry guests talking about some of their favorite movies.
So many great conversations on that show about so many great movies.
We have so much fun having these conversations, but producing the show week after week does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these incredible conversations.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material for all the adapted film discussions on the Next Reel's family of podcasts. Purchasing through our links supports the show.
It's your one-stop shop for Amazon and Apple links where you can buy your copy of the original source material.
Original material for movies we like, movies like Casino Royale,
The Silent Partner,
Never Let Me Go,
Silver Linings Playbook,
There Will Be Blood, based on Upton Sinclair's Oil.
I believe it's Oil!
Oh yeah, I forgot the exclamation point.
Plus, by using those links to buy your next read, Apple and Amazon show us a little bit of love, which allows you to support our family of shows with minimal effort.
thenextreel.com/originals. It's a great way to support the show and find your next page turner.
That's right. Head over to thenextreel.com/originals to pick out your next read and dig in today.